blended or hybrid for a long time. And I was very excited by this opportunity to kind of be forced to do it. Religious education is not simple online. It's already hard to inspire a commitment to something in our young people. Adults are doing better. The Seder online is wonderful, and Minyan and Shiva calls online are wonderful, and visits to Israel and tours for adults online are wonderful. Teenagers, young kids, online is rough. You need role modeling. You need to kind of do Jewish in person. And I would say that has not worked. Not horrible, but it's not something that we were or are prepared for. And it's something that we really need to be thinking about deeply. How does it look differently online? You can't just try to, which is what we were doing, try to do stuff that we were doing in person online slightly differently. It's got to be a whole different worldview, I think. And sorry if I went on too long. I don't know what our time
Thank you.
are.
Those are great comments, and I'm sure we'll come back to them when we look ahead to the future. Next, I want to turn to, from a head of school perspective, to a different perspective with Alex Traeger as Director of Digital Learning and Technology. Before I ask the question, Alex, just to observe that among the networking that we see through Prisma, I have been amazed by the conversations, the dynamism of you and your EdTech colleagues throughout this period, who sometimes I think may be hidden in our schools. I just wanted to call it out, what an incredible job you and your colleagues are doing. And really ask you this question: how did your role shift during the coronavirus crisis? And can you share with us some of the challenges as you see them in moving online?
First, thank you for including me, and thank you for pointing out the networks that came out, and Prisma and other local private schools came together, and there's been a tremendous amount of collaboration. And I think one of the greatest changes of my role has become a learner. And whereas we were very comfortable, most of us were very comfortable in our role as somebody who knew a lot in your building, and all of a sudden knew very little on how to approach the situation, and having the collaborative efforts that were created by different organizations has been tremendous, and honestly accounts for a lot of the success that we have experienced as a school with learning. Another reason I think for the success of the transition, I think as a day school, we had certain things already in place. We had the community established, we had the parents' support and partnership established, and we had a certain culture established. And I think taking the culture and transitioning to Zoom, which is what our school ended up using, really allowed for us to continue our learning, because we had our morning meetings and that was already set up. And once we took care of our emotional needs with our students and we had the communication that was open, I think that really facilitated that. In the sense of what it looked like before, some teachers were using Google, Google Classroom, some teachers were using Seesaw, but being a small private school, it was very personal, and we have anywhere from 12 to 20 students in the classroom. So some technology tools that were available to us weren't used because it just wasn't a necessity to use them. Obviously, all of a sudden it became a necessity. We had a 1 hour professional development. We had 1 full day of learning, and then we had a half a day, and that was it. The greatest challenge for me was to turn our school that was in-school devices for a majority of the school and turn them into one-to-one, including filtering and security and all that kind of stuff. I literally had my specialist team, the art teacher, PE teacher, music teacher, helping me put filtering on the devices that were being filtered in-house to go home. And that was a little intense. The other way the role shifted is from the classroom and being a facilitator to little tech support. I had 2 to 3 laptops open, iPad, phone. Families were calling me on a cell phone. So that was a lot. And I think with teachers, I think the challenge was, how do we take the units that we had? What do we keep? What still works with e-learning? And what do we need to reinvent and change that would work with distance learning?
Thank you. Moving next to Rachel Abrams. Rachel, you are someone who has been a passionate advocate for online tools and for blended learning for many, many years, and has been leading the way on this for us. So as such a long time advocate, what successes and challenges have you seen in the day school field in these last few months as we've shifted online during the crisis?
So first, I also want to echo thanks to being a part of the session, and thanks to Prisma for all the work that you've done over the last 3-4 months in bringing schools together and keeping everybody going. I want to echo some of the things that Mark said at the beginning. I think overall, it's been a success, right? The work that everyone from heads of school to individual teachers has done over the last 3 months is really incredible, right? And everyone doing it at the same time as they were all dealing with whatever they were dealing with at home, children at home, spouses at home, working from home. It's actually really incredible. We all really need to give ourselves a round of applause. I think that we've learned that this kind of instruction takes a lot more time and effort and planning sometimes than regular face-to-face instruction that we're used to. So I think overall the transition was a success. We hear it all the time about how parents are really amazed at what schools have done. And I would say the one thing that stands out to us at JIC and the Mayberg Foundation is the work that schools did to continue to create community among their students and families in ways that they actually weren't doing beforehand necessarily, right? Kabbalat Shabbat, Havdalah, things that kind of extended school beyond the times and the things that the programs that we were, that we're used to seeing from schools. And I think that was really very important and successful, right? And that's really what the platform is great for, right? Paul, I think you commented, this is the first time in the last 2 days that we've gotten to see each other, right? And that's a very important part of Zoom as a platform. To flip for a second for challenges, I think we know that within the day school community, there's a wide range of schools and where they were at in terms of ed tech and online or blended learning before this. And so everyone really went in with a different readiness to shift, whether it was as a school overall or as individual teachers. And that's hard, right? Not every school has what Ari described in terms of devices for every student. Not every school, it really depends on how big your school was, what kind of finances you were dealing with before. So I think we have a really big range, and we'll continue to see that range as we move, ahead. This is also expensive, right? It can be expensive, right? The need for devices for kids, the need for internet at home, that's a challenge. And then I would say the one other challenge that I hope we'll continue to talk about as we look forward is that most people, understandably, move to this platform that we're on right now, Zoom, as their primary platform of delivery. And that means for a lot of the time, there was a lot of frontal instruction, right? Things that teachers would not necessarily have done if they had their students in front of them, right? We're trying to, as a field, I think, move away from that. And so Zoom kind of may have put us back in a sense of being again in a more passive stance for students and in a more frontal approach for teachers. And I think that that's a challenge of what happened. It's understandable, but I think as we switch to looking forward, we have to consider what that means.
Thank you. And I think you are absolutely right that this is a moment before we transition to looking at next year, really to appreciate what every educator has done to engage their students, to teach their students, to support their colleagues and to support families. So a thank you to every educator on this call and to all of your colleagues. When we are looking forward now over the next year, we have a lot of uncertainties in front of us, and we, I think, all assume the likelihood of mixing in person with online at times that perhaps are unpredictable. And right now, what we're all seeing, of course, is the immense pressure on schools to figure out complex logistics towards hopefully school reopening. So with all of that, how do we make the educational experience in the upcoming school year excellent? Let me start with you, Alex.
First, I'd like to point out that it is definitely our teachers. We have teachers who about a year ago said, can you help me figure out my email? And a month ago, we're leading 60 student VLA session and highlighting, and the tremendous amount of growth that unfortunately COVID propelled the teachers to do and really empowered, I think, the teachers. And I think that what we could do now is take that and say, we literally could do anything now, and what can we do? And I think this is where it falls on what your school has established, a strong leadership community, a strong parent body. And I think for success in the next year, we need to focus on a couple of things. I think first, we need to reflect on the mission and vision of the school and really know where we stand pedagogically. If your school has a Reggio approach and you feel strongly about it, and that is what you believe in, then we need to talk about how do we translate it into Zoom or whatever format you're using. We need to focus on engaging our students through time-worth learning opportunities, project-based learning, passion learning projects, genuine inquiry. I think it's going to be very important to focus on skills for students. If we're going to talk about time management, how to ask good questions, it doesn't have to be just middle school. We have a Reggio approach, Reggio inspired in JK and K classroom. And what they did was tremendous. They would start in the morning with provocation. They would have some sort of a question, or they would share something. And the teachers would keep their Zoom open while the students then went into their space, into their rooms, into their living rooms, and created whatever they were working on, and then would come back and check in with the teachers. And the amount of learning that was happening was just incredible. They put on musicals, they were cooking, they were baking, they were doing art. And I think reshifting our lessons is also going to be really huge. Another big thing is going to be redefining assessment. What is it that we're assessing? Because one of the things that came up in our conversation with technology directors and facilitators is, how do we monitor assessment? The question is, do we want to monitor assessment? Is the assessment just going to be multiple choice questions that can be looked up on Google? Or is it going to be really deep and meaningful assessment? So we need to slow down. We need to talk about what's important, what are the skills that we're looking for, and how we're going to assess that. I do think one of the biggest things that's going to play a role in how successful a school is how we're supporting our teachers. We know that our families need to be supported and our students need to be supported, but I think it's going to be very important that we continue to support our teachers. We need to make sure that they have time to slow down, refocus, replan their lessons, and whether it is an extra Friday off or whether it is 4 weeks on, 1 week off, whatever the school does, I think it's going to be important to remember that unlike in the spring where we had spring break and we were going towards the summer, this is going to be a very long-term marathon, and it's going to be very important to plan for breaks. That's my personal opinion. And I think we have an opportunity to kind of say, we as teachers have been talking about lifelong learning, and we've been talking about student-driven, and this is our opportunity to do that. So I think all of those things are going to play a big role coming up next year.
Thank you. Rachel, what's your perspective on the year ahead and how we can make it excellent?
So a lot of what Alex said, obviously, I agree with. I think people have to be looking to multimodality learning. And I saw some comments. Yes, Zoom is not only frontal, so it means how to do better synchronous learning, as well as thinking about asynchronous learning, whether that means project-based learning, whether that means on platforms, whether that means passion projects, a lot of the things that Alex mentioned. I think, there's a lot of different terms, right, that get thrown around. What we've been doing on Zoom is not really online learning, right? It's remote learning. And the question is, do you want to be doing online learning? Do you want a blend? What modalities are you thinking of employing? And I think a lot of that leads to design, the challenges in design, right? Thinking about the way you design a unit, which are the parts that need to be in person. There are definitely times that we need a teacher. We need kids to see the other students in their classroom, whether in small groups or whole group, classroom. But it's really about thinking about which pieces have to be done in which ways. And I'll say one more thing. I think a big piece or challenge to shifting from what we've done in the last 4 months to what we might do this coming year is bringing families along. Because as families think about children being home and them perhaps having to change the way they worked, they've been very used to kind of the notion that schools will provide coverage, right? Time in a Zoom room that helps them tremendously as parents, right? And if we're going to shift away from that, how do we begin to explain why we're doing that and what are the benefits to children, teachers as well, but what are the benefits to the learning process of moving into other modalities? And I think that's a very big piece of what we have to be doing this summer in the messaging that goes out to our school communities.
Thank you. And now let me turn to you, Ari, for your perspective on the year ahead.
So it's hard to go third in this group. So I'll try to just add things that were not already said. So I do think communication that things are going to go wrong is critical, that whatever we plan for, that we have to expect the unexpected. Everyone's publishing 15, 20, 30-page booklets about how reopening is going to look and what the plans are. And my belief is that almost all of it will be dated, within a week or two. And I think it's not enough to just know that. I think we need to be communicating with families, parents, students, teachers, that's okay. That's part of the growth process. And that shouldn't, create some sort of clouds over the education we're offering. I think obviously flexibility, it's something we've talked about, resilience and grit. We preach it all the time to our students. We've talked about it being the #1 indicator of success in the rest of your life. And then the question is, are we modeling it? Are we modeling the ability to adapt and change and shift and look at things in a new way? This asynchronous, synchronous hybrid. So, I guess maybe everyone's thinking about it this way. I was not. I was always thinking asynchronous and synchronous hybrid is like you have a synchronous class and then there's some asynchronous stuff. Rather than saying, if we knocked everything down that you believed about education before, and now here's the opportunity. People have to be at home for a week and then in school for a week and then home for a week. What would you do? The problem is we have so many models in our head that we don't even realize they are frameworks that we use to look at things. And so the question is how we can get outside of those frameworks and think differently, like really differently about what education should look like. The last two things I would say is, and I know this is easier for some schools to say than others, but again, I'm going to invest in the tech side of things as much as I can, not just to throw money at tech, but because I have found that what we've done is the drips and the drabbles. You're like, well, I don't want to pay for 1 gig of internet speed because that's, it's so much more expensive. Or I don't want to get the OWL cameras. I'd rather just make do with the Logitech webcams. And then what ends up happening is it's a frustrating experience for the teachers and for the students. And then they sort of give up. People tend to, whatever that barrier to entry is. And again, I know this is not necessarily doable for everybody, but I do think some of what has always held back online learning since the days of the Lookstein Center 20 years ago is the tech was never there. Like the speed of the internet, the quality of the communication. It was always kind of very choppy. We're there now where it's not, but you really do have to invest in the tools for the teacher. So you can't give a math teacher the same tools as a science teacher, as a Gemara teacher, as the Israel Ed and the Hebrew teachers. They all have very specific requirements that will enable them to be the best that they can be. And so I think it's really important to listen to our teachers and ask them, what is it that you need? What support do you need? What content and materials do you need? Because they're the ones who know what's working and what's not. And finally, and I think we often forget this, but I think we need to ask our kids how it's going in a way that allows them to give us real, brutally honest, I don't like the word because I don't think it's bad, but like we use brutal, like just real feedback, good, bad, what can we be doing better? How is this going? I think we all shall have it. We did an amazing job and like we think we did so well. And then you like check with the students and they're like, meh, it's not as good as you thought. Not in a bad way. That's fine. It's a formative assessment in the language of the educators online. It's not a summative at the end of the year. How did we do? We really need to be asking our kids, Parents are different question. I think we have to be communicating with our parents, but they're giving you more of pain points. Like my kid is, seems bored. My kid is happy. That's not, to me, the feedback that I really want to know if the education is going well and how our students are doing. I need to hear from them from first grade through 12th grade. So, one last thing. Alex, you made an amazing point. I think in the rush to do shift and new and think differently, I want to make sure we don't lose what's the heart and the soul of the school. So for us, it's the just community. You mentioned Reggio or Montessori, whatever it is that makes your school special. It doesn't mean that doesn't shift and look different in 2020 than it did, or 2021 than it did in 2019. But I don't want to lose the heart and soul of what makes a Jewish day school and ours in particular special. So I think that that's really important to keep as a North Star. So thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you. And I think for everyone, keeping our North Star in mind is such a crucial thing. I was going to go a little bit further into the future, but rather than do that, if we can, we'll come back to it later. I want to start on some of the questions that our other participants have been asking and that Mark has been gathering and synthesizing. So keep the questions and comments coming. There's some wonderful things in the chat. I won't ask all of our speakers to comment on every question. We'll try and keep it moving. Let me start with a question that was bubbling up, and then Alex, you really framed it very strongly as well, which is the question about assessment and really how we think about this in Tachlis terms, I guess. How are we going to make sure that students are learning? So interesting to sort of hear any ways that that you found assessment of student learning has worked, any tools that you have seen developed, and anything you would suggest needs to be better. Ari, you were third last time. Let me start with you.
So here's the honest truth. I am not the expert. I will call Rabbi David Block and Dr. Daniel Weslow, who are my principals, and say to them, they're working with all the faculty now. It's our only, there are two summer standing committees right now. One is assessment and how we are changing the way we assess for lots of reasons having to do with, everyone on here understands. And also faculty support, how we're supporting faculty through these transitions, professional development. I know there's lots of websites out there, products out there. To me, this is about a conversation with faculty. It's not about here's one thing that works and this is what the direction we're going. I've never found that to be successful, especially when there's a need for flexibility and you have different people with different skills and personalities. It's about having a conversation, resource sharing among faculty. But I think Rachel and Alex and probably people on the chat are better equipped to tell you. I can answer other questions, Paul, but how we're going to make sure assessment is great is not my sweet spot.
And I would say to all of our colleagues here, if you've got suggestions on assessment or any of these questions, just feel free to add them to the chat. There is such a rich conversation going on. Alex, you were posing a lot of questions on this subject. Are you seeing among your colleagues the beginnings of maybe not answers, but ideas that will help people shape this?
I think starting conversations is going to be the most important. And I think technology, as we've been saying for many years, is just the tool to do what you pedagogically you're trying to do. So the reality is there might be Flipgrid and there might be Seesaw and there might be a million other tools. And there are literally tools coming out weekly from even platforms that were not assessment tools are now adding assessment tools. And the reality is it's just a tool. I think you need to reflect on what with backwards design could be one of the ways you could start. And you're going to say, when these students walk away in 2020-21 school year, considering the state of the world and considering the state of the school, what is it that we want them to walk away? What kind of content knowledge do we want them to have? What kind of skills do we want them to be able to use? What do we want them to contribute to the world in 10 years that they will reflect and say, this is the skills and tools I have gained during this COVID crisis? And I think the tools is, I think sometimes we get carried away because sometimes we just want the tools, but those are Googleable. And I think that's going to be important. Conversations that we're having are not Googleable. It's conversations that get to the depth of the issue, whereas the tools are just going to fall in and fill in the space.
Rachel?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. One is it depends on if we're talking about formative assessments, right, that happen kind of all along a unit or a semester, or summative assessments, right? Those have to be possibly handled in different ways. And I think we have to start thinking about what's, for lack of a better term, called alternative assessment, right? That it's not just about spitback of content knowledge or even necessarily demonstration of skills, right, in the way that we are most used to. But how can a student demonstrate that they have learned the lessons, whatever those lessons are, of the material of the unit in other ways, right? And it might even be that students help create those alternative assessments on their own, right? How do I demonstrate to you that I know what I've learned, right? Either back to project-based learning or something that they submit, even if it's in writing. But definitely not just, I agree with everything that's been said. It's not just about what tools we use. And obviously, you know, the questions of academic honesty, especially in older grades, you know, come into play in probably any tool that you could think of. So it's a perfect time to kind of break the box a little bit and think about other ways to assess.
Thank you. I want to move on to another of the questions that's come up in the chat, which is something I think, Rachel, actually you referred to, which was online versus remote learning. So Zoom and other conferencing models have been used to recreate a classroom model. How do we shift our lessons and train our teachers to use both synchronous as well as asynchronous models of learning? Rachel, let's start with you.
So there's a big professional development piece, right, that's involved in making that shift. It's happened in some schools already. It definitely has been worked on over the last, you know, 7 years of day schools moving into the blended and online space, but there's a lot more to do. It's one of the reasons that Prisma, United, and JEIC are working this summer to have professional development sessions with United and Better Lesson. You know, we're open to consulting. There's not really one particular way that this can be done. It does take work, right, to learn how to think about designing lessons with different pieces. I think once we start exposing teachers to that more and more, they're going to be able to make that switch quickly, right? I think it's just about, like, what does it mean? And I think it's a little bit about a mindset about moving from kind of being the teacher we're used to being to a little bit more of being the guide, right? A child is going to work a little bit more independently and check in with you, or you're going to be getting data from what they submit, whether it's a writing sample or questions they've answered online. And you're going to have to kind of know how to get them to that next space, even when they're not with you. So there is no kind of quick and easy way. It's really about learning. There are courses to take online. I've seen people kind of also putting in the chat things that they're doing to learn more about this. There are also, I should say, there are things that have been created, you know, that are available in the general studies world. There are lots of tools that can be incorporated. Khan Academy has videos, right? It's lots of flipped kind of things to use. And in the Jewish end, there is some of that as well. Lookstein Virtual Jewish Academy, Online Jewish Studies Consortium. There are lots of tools, Merkava, things like that, that people have to learn kind of how to take advantage of and build into their lessons. And obviously, you know, we stand as resources if people are interested in exploring that further.
Thank you. I'm going to ask some other questions, but if anyone who hasn't spoken on a subject you want to come back to it, feel free. A question for you, Alex. What needs to be true about the collaboration between education and technology to make advances in blended and online learning really work?
I actually want to kind of chime in on the previous, and I think it's going to connect with all the educational classes I took in my long time ago in the university. I have to say there was one sentence that to this day defines what I do with my classes. And the question that this professor said before you sit down to write your lesson plan is what you're going to ask is, what is the student doing? So instead of saying, I'm going to introduce this lesson, I am going to talk into Zoom or whatever you are envisioning, you need to flip that. And you're going to say, what is the student doing? And if you have a kindergartner watching you talk for 15 minutes, that's probably not going to work. So what activities is the student going to do and the pace of those activities that's really going to accomplish your goal. So it's super simple, but that has always been my kind of starting point. What is the student going to do throughout my 40-minute lesson or whatever you're doing? And I think that's where the technology comes in. If I'm going to ask them to create something, then I'm going to find the technology that's going to work for that. And if we're sharing a story, then I'm going to need my document camera, or I'm going to scan the pages ahead of time, and whatever it is that you want the child to be doing at home if they're on distance learning, and what are the tools you're going to need to accomplish that. And I think what's kind of been an interesting shift is we went from integrating technology and trying to like, okay, they're going to use this in the classroom and they're going to use it in the classroom, to now we're literally saying, what can the students do at home so they're not on the screen? So I just find it very interesting and ironic how we kind of switched that now. Instead of just integrating technology, we're really using technology, and we're just trying to find how to accomplish our goals using the tools that we have.
Thank you. Let me move to you, Ari. You've talked quite a lot about technology investment, and how do you make sure that when you invest in technology, you're actually making an investment in education successfully? And maybe as a secondary thing, I can see there's some chat about shocks that you might want to comment on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the shock first, because I think the tech you buy has to be guided by what you can envision. If you buy something and then you're guided by the tech, so with what you're able to do, I think that's doing things backwards. So I think the first question is, what's possible? So the conversation in the chat is about a shock to the system. I don't remember who. I think someone named Miriam started saying it. Like, what about a school having some people get classes from this school online and then doing some stuff in person? Absolutely. I think that's the shock to the system that I'm talking about. And I think it's a good one, but just realize anytime you bring up a possibility that messes with the status quo, even in times like COVID, fear takes over, and people who worry that they're not going to be left standing at the end will resist it with everything they have in ways that they may not even be aware of. They'll just say, nah, this is not a good idea. You can't do it this way. So we have to think through, once we've decided what the changes are, how you do that. You can't just do it and expect people to come along. I mean, sometimes you can, but you really have to have control of the whole system. So for instance, I've been head of school in Houston, Texas, and now I'm in Los Angeles. And by the way, next year I'm moving to Israel and managing my school over Zoom and Asana for 2/3 of the month. So that's another shock to the system. I don't know how many, we haven't had a lot of people managing schools from afar, whether it's chief educational officer, chief financial officers, heads of schools, teachers, we can do to some degree, but I think that's a shock to the system. But from an educational perspective, when we were in Houston, Texas, our teachers worked so hard, but it's just, there's only so many resources you have, especially in the Judaic studies and Hebrew language realm, although the Hebrew language teaching in Houston is amazing, to be able to access, I don't know, Shalhevet or the schools in New York, or to have students dial in and then supplement, or that's the supplement, and have your on ground classes for the in-person role modeling and socialization that is so important to Jewish education. We've got to start thinking that way. Even locally in California, schools that are doing well, we're in touch with Milken and De Toledo right now, sharing computer science. We have an amazing computer science program. Milken has an amazing robotics lab. De Toledo has an artist in residence. We all have some of those programs, but none of us have all of those. And so to share those resources, we are now seeing that you can do that because of Zoom. The teacher is going to have to teach somewhat differently for the kids who are in the class and online, and we have to think through that. But if we were taking this as an opportunity the next 2, 3, 4 years to invest in the tech, to record every class, and I know there's student pupil records, which is a big question, and legal questions around that. But just imagine, we recorded every class that was taught for the next 2 or 3 years because they're on Zoom for the most part. And then we had 15 graduate students from JTS and YU and who knows where take those classes and turn them into self-contained classes. So a kid who's in a Jewish community in Omaha that doesn't have a big Jewish, certainly doesn't have a high school, I don't know if they have a lower school, could then take a whole set of online classes like Khan Academy, but better, because you have the assessments and you have the essential questions that the teacher is asking. we have an opportunity here if we can jump in and take I see Chaim wrote that other schools are doing that. I mean, the schools, maybe they're doing it for the schools and Shalhevet's not a part of it. But in my world, the schools with the best classes and the best teachers. So, SAR for this, Shalhevet for that, Milken for that, Day Toledo for that. They have the best educators, and record them. Use that technology so that it's not just how do we get over this hump right now? It's how do we take this, get over the hump, and leverage it for the next 10 years to have a paradigm shift in education. And so I think it's worth us thinking about that. So when you asked about the technology, Paul, to me, if you think about the technology right here, so I'll buy an owl because that's the best 360-degree angle, and I'll buy this because that's the best this, and that's what I can afford. But I want to think, what's 5 years from now? What's 3 years from now? What's 10 years from now? And then what technology should we buy to make that happen?
Let's build on that. And I would again encourage anyone who's got suggestions to keep putting them in the chat, because these are big questions. What does the future opportunity beyond crisis look like that we can really take advantage of? And Ari, thank you for opening it up. But let me turn next to Rachel. Over to you. Talk about the long term.
Yes. So I would say the reason that our work at Avichai a long time ago explored online and blended learning was really as a tool to personalization, right? And I think that that's also for me an important part to kind of keep in mind as where we might be headed, right? Alex and I, you said like keep the core of your school, right? So for me, keeping the core of this movement alive is with the end goal of personalization, right? And what it really means to be able to give students who need different experiences within the same classroom, whether it means working at different paces, different pathways, more choice, more student voice. Like I said before, how do I show you that I've accomplished my goals in a different way? And how do we really know that students have mastered material and skills that we want them to do, but possibly getting there at different points in time, right? Not because we've finished the unit in the book, we all take a test, and no matter what we all got on that test, we move on to the next unit. So that's, I think, where I continue to work towards. And this presents, I think, some of those opportunities for all of us to kind of think about how new modalities, continue to get us there, and where it doesn't mean isolate each individual child right at the beginning. It might mean that we're able to work more in small groups because we have data that's coming from software that we're using, and then we're able via Zoom perhaps to teach those groups individually. But really, and it might mean personalization in that your school can't offer certain courses because you're in a small community, whether it's in Judaic studies or you don't have money to pay for a Mandarin teacher, right? And this notion of either Zoom or online learning presents opportunities to personalize in that way as well. So I think that's kind of where I hope that this will continue to move us.
Alex, let me turn to you.
I agree with things that have been said. And I think one of the things we kind of has been happening in education is we're very siloed. We work in our teams and our departments, and maybe we'll partner up with another day school that happens to be 10, 15 minutes away. And there's been collaboration by different organizations that's happening, but there's been a tremendous push to not only collaborate just with day schools, and not just in the US and not just in US and Israel, but really globally. And even if you just look on Facebook with the global initiative Facebook that happened with at this point, I think it's over 100,000 educators anywhere from China and around the world, sharing the resources, sharing strategies. And I think that's been a really silver lining of this. And not only can we apply this for the teacher and professional development, we can apply that for students because they're no longer limited to just collaborating with students in their classroom or they're in school. And it's not just a pen pal that a teacher might have chosen one other classroom somewhere across the country, and we could really kind of broaden our scope. I think the other thing that kind of has happened, and I think could be silver lining, is there's been a lot of creative thinking and ingenuity that's happening. Just look at the platforms that has been created, and even the different professional development that I've attended in the last month or two, anything from science to the summit and the tools that have been created, I'm blown away by this app. And just what the last 2 days, if you've watched any of the presenters and just the technologies being used in conversations that are being had, it's pretty impressive. I also think education has been kind of put to the back for majority of the people in the world, except for educators. And all of a sudden now everybody wants to know, what are the schools doing? How are the schools opening? So if we're able to bring education back to the forefront and say, education is going to be important, especially reasoning, critical thinking. If we start talking about we're in this pandemic and what are some of the things that could have been done while we had notices ahead of time. And if we just thought critically, maybe we could have saved more lives or done something differently. And I think these are the skills that we could, we need to enhance with our students and say what we can learn from it. So I think just having on the news, people talking about schools, all of a sudden the parents are really involved in a way that they haven't been before through different chat groups that I'm in, and just seeing, oh, parents have like these conversations of how it's going to work. So I think those are, I think we really are in a position to create really meaningful pedagogic change. I think we've talked about it. We've talked about student-centered, and we've talked about passion projects, and we've talked about all these things, but it's really hard to get out of your comfort zone and say, yes, I'm going to learn all these new things and do it, but now we have to. Now we have been put into this position and we don't have another choice. And we all went into the teaching position because we're creative, we're passionate, we care about the future. And this is really our opportunity to feel that passion again and say, we are almost at the start again, and we could redefine what education is going to look in a year or 5.
Thank you. I think that we're going to begin to wrap up. Ari, you wanted to add one more thing? Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing, and that's, I think it's important for me, everyone on this call, to look at yourselves, meaning we're expecting teachers to make lots of changes, parents, students, and I think the question is, are we changing to the new modality? That doesn't just mean, are we on Zoom? That means managing a school that's a hybrid. It can't look the same, meaning it's just unfathomable. And I found that out. We were running everything and it's amazing. And we're running classes and Havdallahs and you name it, everyone's doing it. We're working 24/7. And I saw that things were fraying on the management team. And it was because I was trying to run the management team the way I ran the management team before. And from a distance, it's different. So we are now retraining on Asana as an example for project management. We've never used it, and I love management. I think that we have to model for our teachers, who they can then model for the students or model for the principals, that we ourselves realize that it's a new day and we can't just ourselves operate. So if you're if you're on here delivering professional development and you're delivering it the same way you were last year, I think that's a mistake. You can't tell teachers to develop themselves professionally when you yourself as a teacher of professional development are not developing ourselves professionally. Something to think about.
Thank you. It certainly is. And I wanted to, in a moment, I'm going to hand it back to Mark, who's going to summarize and draw our conversation together. But the couple of things that I just particularly stand out to me. One is as Alex was describing, we have talked about a lot of these issues for a long time. And Ari, as you were just saying, it's actually about us acting differently, and in particular, so that the optimism and the ideas that all of you were sharing with us about what the future could look like is something that we really embrace and change to be able to do, in order that once this crisis is, please God, is past us, we don't simply gravitate back to where we were before, because I think we are seeing something which is positive, which should give us optimism, that needs a lot of change. So I really appreciate Ari, Alex, Rachel, your comments, your insights, and all the work that you do. And now just to summarize and bring us back together, back to Mark Wolf. You're on mute, Mark.
There we go. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for the excellent playing the role of moderator for this. And I will echo the thanks to Rachel, Ari, and Alex as well. So I just want to say I've always sort of been taken with the game of chutes and ladders. And, you're sort of plodding along on the course of chutes and ladders, and, you're playing the game. And there are moments that you get a ladder and you get to advance up. And there are moments that you hit a chute and you slide back down. So I think for me, that's a great metaphor for throughout a lot of this coronavirus crisis. And we've had a number of chutes and we've had a number of ladders and we've had maybe even a couple more chutes than we wanted to. What I see now is this is a moment, and this is there's a question that I would love to ask everybody on this call, which is, do you see this moment as a real opportunity to advance blended and online learning? Or do you think that when coronavirus ends, we're going to default back to where we were? And we're going to just go back to teaching and learning like we always used to? And the corollary to that one, obviously, is how do we make sure that we don't? There are a number of questions that are live with the field right now about assessment, professional development, balancing synchronous and asynchronous learning, technology tools, faculty, student, and family support throughout all of this. But from the perspective of Prisma, we'd really love to see this as a moment of a ladder. And what can we do to invest in this right now to actually go up a few levels on that board? I want to pass it back to Sharona. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Sharona, for the conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for this beautiful panel. Rachel, Ari, Alex, Mark, and Paul. It was tremendous listening to you today. We hope to see you again in other event that IC will put together for the community. So thanks. We have a final short video that we want to share with you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Ari. Really appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. This was a great conversation. And and it's interesting that you played the video before with the highlights. And I was like, I saw that and I saw that. And it really, even though that some have been talking about university level, it was so applicable across the whole education spectrum.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there a way that we're going to be able to get a recording? I would love to read the chat, and I was trying not to pay so much attention, but it's, I think for those of us that like want to see what people were saying, is there a way that we're going to be able to do that?
Definitely. Everything is first of all, it was broadcast in Facebook live, and so everything is there.